was I going with that?
I don't know. I do have a starting point in regards to that.
Yeah. Because it'll come to me midway through this.
Yeah, exactly. So, at the last time I saw you play solo was at Disco Beats, and there was this moment where you kicked. You didn't intentionally kick something out, but something came out of your setup.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I've been tempted to kind of put that in the film, but I haven't.
Because, I mean, go ahead. That happens to me all the time.
Well, it happens to all of us all the time, right? And this is the thing I guess I'm kind of interested about, because like your response obviously is the same for all of us, which is like, fuck. What? But why? Why is it annoying?
I don't actually find it annoying.
Really?
I think it's great because it kind of gives me another starting point, so I can just. I get very bored with music very quickly. And it's harder, especially with that feedback setup, because it's so temperamental and it's based on the space rather than the instrument or what you necessarily do to it.
Yeah.
When something gets pulled out and there's no sound, I can just kind of go a quick little and come back to something completely different. So I like that. But because it looks kind of lame when, you've kicked, it is a performance.
Do you like playing solo then, or do you hate it based on this kind of anything like that?
It's something that I want to be better at, but I kind of don't feel I have the the capabilities that I want when I play solo, because what I'm doing with, except for that album launch where I had the loop going, it is, a single sound source. I'm not, I may occasionally add in like a theremin over the top of it, so, I've got two tones just to get some heterodyning stuff happening, but I just feel so naked,
For myself, I feel as though, it's a dual thing. I don't necessarily think in a duo or trio format, you are naked because, obviously you've got other people to feed off, and sort of improvising, you're meant to have you're meant to be open to the other people's ideas. You're improvising with the other members of your ensemble, whether it be a duo, trio, or larger ensemble. So that's a very kind of insulating thing and comforting thing, I think. As a solo performer, you're still improvising, but when I've done it myself, just in the studio, and I've actually sat down and made a point of improvising and sort of trying to develop themes maybe that I've been messing around, or trying to just develop very, very basic things. It's interesting because you're improvising, but there's no outside influence. Everything is completely contained in yourself, and you rely upon yourself to make this happen, and kind of there's always the possibility, and I think you should be aware of it maybe when you're improvising as a solo, in a solo context. This is all coming from yourself. Is there the possibility of that performance then becoming insular? Are you just kind of messing around in your own head? Is this they're things that I've thought about. Is this actually going to be pleasurable for other people to watch?
So perhaps in a traditional sense, that absorbing in yourself, inside yourself, is in a negative way. I try not to do that, so I'm constantly being open and relating to what's happening. But at the same time, it's such a, my sound, the way I perform, it's such a intimate expression in a way. So there's always having to access that internal parts of myself, sort of what's happening, what do I want to express in a way. Yeah.
So it's based on the atmosphere that you're always engaging with in a performance environment. So in that way, it doesn't become completely internalized because you're always feeding off whatever's external as a reference point. Is that a fair?
Yeah, but at the same time, what I'm performing is expressing what's internal as well.
But you don't dwell internally when you're doing it. You're dwelling externally.
I guess imagine more of a feedback loop.
Yes, it's a good analogy.
Yeah,
So you're oscillating between external and internal constantly in a performance.
Well, I think it's one of the reasons that I kind of failed as a composer, really, is that I don't think I have an internalized... I don't have an internal sound world. Well, that's not entirely true, but it's not... I don't work that way, in the sense that I don't have something in my head that I have to get out. You know, that's the sort of romantic notion. Composers have this, you know, traditionally, you know, this Beethoven, you know, this sort of tortured guy who's got all this stuff in his head that he has to get out of his head. There's no kind of exorcism like that for me. I don't have some kind of truth, an inner sonic truth that I need to get out of my head.
Does when I do this, or that's more my concern. How does this plug in together? What happens when I do this and put this together?
Exactly.
To see, how it works. My process is also internal though, so it can be like, oh, I've got this idea. How does this? How would it sound? And then sometimes it's like not terrible.
Totally.
but usable.
And when I was talking about that internal thing before, I do have an internal life. I'm not completely void. And so I do have this, like I have ideas as well, but they're often, what I was trying to get at before is that they're not particularly sonic. So, you know, some people will have a really rich sort of inner sonic life, and one where they're trying to, you know, give birth to what's in their head. And I would work much more from having an idea that will have a sonic outcome, but which is much more about the process of locking things together. Or what happens if I do build this way or tweak this way, or but I won't. But I think the interesting thing for me is that I won't know what that sounds like. That's kind of the interesting thing, is that I don't want to give birth to something that's in my head. I want to hear things that I've never heard before.
Do you always know the sound you want to make before you make it?
No, definitely not.
Definitely not?
Yeah.
Then, like, if you don't like the sound that it makes, do you instantly just change it to try and...
Yeah. That's why I play the way that I do. Because I change stuff very quickly if I don't like it.
Is it the same approach with when you play saxophone, like improvising? Like, is it still similar?
It depends on the context, really.
Yeah.
You know. I tend to get in a little bit different headspace when I play that stuff, but maybe not, because I sometimes when I play this stuff, I kind of go into, I kind of lose track of really what's around me, or if there's even people there, and so it really depends on how long I play, and that's a hard one to answer.
Yeah. How do you lose track of things? I'm curious.
I mean, you go deeply into the experience of what you're doing, and sometimes everything around you shuts out, and you just kind of connect with what you're doing, and it's almost kind of trance-like in a little.
Yeah. Do you think it's the sound that creates that environment, like that trance-like environment, or is it the environment that you're playing?
I think the sound inspires it, but I couldn't tell you, whether that's the way my brain is, or if other people do that, just I don't know. It's weird to talk about. I don't really like talking about it. I don't really like analysing it, but it just happens. I think.
Yeah. No matter what you're. Sorry, I won't bug you with more questions about that.
No. I mean, it's just that kind of situation, like sometimes you talk about things like this, you become too conscious of them and then they disappear,
Yeah.
Like telling someone you really like the way they smile and then they never smile like that again.
Yeah.
I think I steer away from analysing what I'm doing much at all while I'm playing. Because like a lot of performers, those thoughts that kind of creep in about what you're doing while you're playing can be quite negative, and I find it better to just try and enjoy myself, just try and have a good time while I'm playing. And I do observe, especially collaborating with people, if something is going well, and that's nice to have a little moment of enjoyment in a set and then to just play on. But I think through studying, through doing postgrad research, I've had the opportunity to analyse my practice away from doing it, but I wouldn't say I've reached the point of over-analysis in that area. And doing that separate to the performing, separate to the composing, I think has been really, really valuable. That's right.
You're just thinking about performing.
Yeah, and about the sound and what I'm making and how it feels.
Yeah.
And I try and do that as an audience member too. I made a real effort a few years ago to not, as an audience member, to try and just switch off a little bit so that I can enjoy a performance. And sometimes, say if there's a percussionist performing or someone who has interesting pedals, I'll be really looking at their gear and really interested in sort of what are they doing and how are they making that sound. But then sometimes I find it's good to make a conscious effort to just sit back and listen, maybe close my eyes and just enjoy, rather than analysing what they're doing and what's that pedal doing and what's that instrument and is that in tune or is that... especially, I mean, I don't play much like conducted music anymore, but watching an orchestra, if I watch the conductor, I find I'm counting and I'm looking for who they're cueing and who's going to come in next, and it kind of kills the art a little bit. So I find it better to just close my eyes and not worry about what's going on.
What happens to me when I listen to sound? I listen to sound every waking and sleeping moment, so I don't know. Last night, when this thing happened to me last night that happens, I guess, like quite often in my life. I always wonder if this happens to everyone, and I kind of assume that it does. Like as I'm drifting off to sleep, like music starts playing in my head, and last night it was this like really nice like arpeggiated organ music. And then there'll be like a small or either like large non-imaginary sound that occurs like within my field, and like it's like this very like harsh cut into that music in my head, and suddenly there's this like really like bleak silence. That's quite nice. So when I what happens when I listen to sound to me? I guess that's like when I hear real world sound, maybe it like there's an example of it having a pretty big effect on my like mental state, and like a very disruptive effect, perhaps.
How does sound affect your mental state?
Wow, that's an involved topic.
It is. That's where we're up to.
Okay. How does sound affect your mental state?
As in yours personally.
Well, I think there's a lot to... There's layers to that question. Because I do personally believe that sound and music specifically is... And I think it's connections to nostalgia, emotions, feelings, makes it one of the more powerful kind of triggers, you know. So I mean, I often find myself just sort of thinking, or even joking with friends, like, you know, you soundtrack your life, you know, through whatever, you know, you're listening to, and how you structure it. And it does affect, you know, and you can steer your whole mood, kind of thoughtfulness or otherwise, you know, based on what you do choose to listen to.
As Leith was talking about this, the soundtracking of your life type idea, and how the music that I choose to listen to in the car on the way to work is carefully chosen depending on the circumstance I'm about to find myself in, or you know, or a reflection of what happened during the day. If I've had an awful day, I'll play quite severe music in the car on the way home.
So what did you find yourself going to for the car ride home?
I have like the music on the phone is divided into categories, right?
I've always loved this about your phone.
Well, I've organised it in different ways over time. At the moment, the one that tends to go with those circumstances is titled throttled on the phone. That was just the word that I put on it, you know. There's like 102 fucking very brutal pieces of sound in there.
So your sound is actually organised in regards to mental states already?
Pretty much, yeah.
There's something about when you line up the sounds that you choose to listen to, you know, be they like, you know, something that you're picking off your phone or whatever in the, you know, a music sense, or whether it's just like the environmental sound, when it lines up with the experience and the time and everything kind of clicks in together, it's really fantastic. You know, there was, and sometimes really weird and seemingly incongruous kind of moments, like Tash and I were just down in Hobart a couple of weeks ago, and we were doing the drive from Hobart up to this national park called Fragility, and it's beautiful. It's these winding roads, and it was this bucketing down rain day, but we were listening to Charlie Hayden's Music Liberation Orchestra, you know, which is like this sort of Cuban-inspired free jazz kind of thing. And if it was just me in the car, I probably wouldn't have picked it. But it was the kind of, for whatever reason, it worked with the dynamic that, you know, my partner liked, and it just fit with the environment and the visuals, and so the whole thing sort of was just this really wonderful sort of experience, just sit and listen to this 60-minute album, almost in silence, just while we're driving through this beautiful countryside. And I don't know, those are the kinds of things that I can think. I've got a bunch of those sort of things in my head from when, often on road trips.
Yeah.
Where you just like, that was the right sound for the right thing and the right time, and it all just works.
It can be performance, it could be an installation, it could be in regards to putting a record on. But what's the process of you choosing that right sound for the right time?
I have a set of sounds. Some of them are pretty much predetermined, and some of them actually are generated from the sounds that I actually that are premeditated. So I kind of will start at one point and end up somewhere else. So for me, it's not so much a matter of how do I make a decision about what sound I actually choose at a time. It's more of the process of temporal process of one to the next. A lot of what I do recently has been quite durational. So it's a matter of maintaining a sound and making extremely minute changes within that sound.
Yeah.
As a way of, perceiving other sounds within that sound, I suppose. Reduced listening sense or durational listening.
Yeah. How do you then, with the temporality of recording, because obviously in a performance environment you can do assumably one take that's live. In a recorded environment you can do infinite amounts. Does the temporality of recording change your compositional approach in any way? Do you see that as, freeing or limiting, that you can then do more? Or?
I actually don't really like releasing my recordings.
Okay.
I actually use them to develop techniques or compositional ideas.
Yeah.
And they're kind of all acoustic tests for me. So it actually feeds back into my live performances.
Yeah.
There's something, and I know I should probably do a solo. I've got about 50,000 recorded solos. People have been like, will you release these? But it's not, for me, it's not really, the stereo situation is not something that I find that interesting. I like the three-dimensional quality of sound.
Yeah.
And I know you can actually, I argued this, that there are a lot of things you can do even within a stereo image to push that kind of three-dimensionality. But for me, it's I like the performance element of it being a shared experience, I suppose.
Yeah.
And maybe this is a major control freak thing too, or maybe I'm just lazy. I'm trying to work it out, that I don't really like the idea of these recordings being listened to in situations that I may not appreciate.
Going back to the original thing.
Yeah.
When a thing goes well, it's when, no matter what noises are happening, I'm being inspired by them in the moment.
Yep.
And with that, I can't go wrong. Do you know what I mean? If I'm being inspired by the noises, and the way to do that is to, of course, short circuit all the things about intent, to forget all that sort of stuff, and just to be experiencing them in the moment. Right, if that happens, then it can't not go well.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so if that happens, at the end of the day, you can't, I don't feel like you can say, this is what makes me know that it went well. If I enjoy certain parts of it, then great, that part of it went well. But it's intangible, you can't sort of quantify it. Do you know what I mean? Do you? I mean, I don't know. Does that makes...
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about, like, if you are feeling inspired, then that is how you feel that it is going well, specifically. Which is a good way of putting it, because, you can't... Like, good or bad is subjective, which is a problem. And I find that, especially when performing sound, and this is my practice personally, there's very much an internal-external battle that's happening. There's the sounds as I perceive them, as in externally, and then the sounds I'm trying to create internally. And so there's a little bit of like a intent.
What do you mean, the sounds you're trying to create internally? What you mean in terms of going back to intent? Or?
Well, I've got an idea of maybe a sound that I want to create at a moment. And whether I can do that or can't do that could be seen as good or bad. But it's not. It's just the sound that I'm making. The good or the bad part actually doesn't exist.
Do you feel like that's something? This is something that I don't know how I feel about. This sort of where, like what you're saying, where you have a sound that at a given moment you want to be able to make a particular sound, and it may or may not work, and because part of me feels like I should just dump all that. I should just forget that entirely. And then another part of me thinks, like if I'm using a particular, like using that little drum machine or using an app in my iPhone or something like that, and I'm just mucking around with it, and after a while I might think, I'm getting better at this. I'm better at this than I was yesterday. So if I keep doing this, I'll get even better. and so then I'll be able to make the sounds that I want to make when I want to make them.
Yep.
And part of me just thinks, fuck that, forget that shit. Just don't go there.
Yeah.
You know? And I don't know. I can't decide whether or not that's a smart thing to do, or it's just, or maybe just it isn't about being smart. It's about just whatever I personally want to do. So
yeah.
Trial and error, I guess. You develop by trying things out and then being like, oh, that sounds shit, or that sounds good.
Yeah.
But I think if you're talking just in terms of how do you develop your sound, that's how I would say. But then if you wanted to talk more about how you develop your person, the person behind the music, I think it's about just constantly thinking about what you want to do and what kind of things are interesting to you personally. Do you know what I mean? So that when you're making a sound, you're coming from you as opposed to this idea of what music should be or what sound should be.
Yeah. So when you say about the sounds coming from you or developing you, how would you go about developing that as opposed to the trial and error practice side of things?
Maybe I would, I guess for a long time I don't know, it's hard to talk about because I feel really cheesy.
It's alright, cheese is fine in this film.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I like to write in journals. That's one of the things. But I also like to, this is also going to make me sound kind of stupid, but I prefer to think about my own things rather than reading lots of texts.
Yep.
I don't like to read other people's, narratives that got them to where they are with their music or so I don't like music documentaries, I don't like music, autobiographies. Well, I guess I also just don't really want to read about other people's music theory and sound theory because I want to just have my own that develops over time.
Yep.
So I write a lot more than I read. And I don't write specifically about sound, I just write about various ideas. And I kind of hope that filters into the practice, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. So the development of personality and sound is as equally important.
Yeah, because I think it's harder to pin down. And the second that you start to try and be like, I want to put personality, I want to make my stuff different to everybody else's, you're actually creating just a sort of a polar opposite reaction to what other people are doing, as opposed to your own ideas. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
It's still it's still kind of, in reacting to those people, it's still confirming that other thing.
Yeah, well, it's just reactionary. It's just because you're doing that, I'll do the opposite, as opposed to, no, this is actually what I want to do.
Yeah, so it actually is very difficult to develop your own signature or personality within your practice, because there is such a feeling that we have to compare to other people and contrast to other people and place ourselves within the history of music somehow.
Yeah.
But you don't get any say in that. You have to let go of that. You have to be I will be placed wherever I'm placed.
Yep.
I don't have any say in that.
Yeah.
And then you just have to think about things and be inquisitive.
Yes. Yeah, constantly.
It's a bit hard to explain. Well, I don't know how to explain it properly, but guitars, you've been taught to play it one way and it's difficult to break out of that. Yeah. Whereas if you're, say, recording some roadworks and then you're just manipulating that with various different effects that have no instruction manual, or if they have one, you've ignored it, then it's open to whatever you want to hear, whatever you hear, and you can go, oh, I like that, let's try and work on that. You kind of go down that path and you can process things multiple times, especially with tapes. Especially these days, I often will go, oh, I like what that's doing, let's record that and then put it through it again. Oh, yeah, and again. And So you can completely ruin a sound or like, you know, make it into something completely different. I've sort of either organically moved or jumped between various different noise genres along the way, and kind of kept the bits I liked of each one along the way, and kind of just ignored everything else.
Yeah.
So like, you know, I still like to work with feedback as well, especially in live context, because it's a nice, exciting and in the moment element that you get in a live performance, and it's nothing like when you do it at home. You know, you can be like so precise at home, and then you like, I know exactly what this will do. Put it in a new room, does something completely different.
I think being live in performance means for me being present and also being active.
Yeah.
So not being just sort of there and pushing buttons.
Yep.
You know, being present as a performer, and that doesn't mean being overwhelming. Because I think sometimes when I perform, it doesn't seem like I'm doing much. But I want to feel present. I want to feel present as a performer. And I want to be an interesting presence for an audience. I think that's what I would say. So I think it's only really been maybe the last few years I've started to think about be more conscious of what I want to achieve as a live performer. And I think that basically came about what I like about seeing performance. You know, and I guess I object to this idea that a sound performance has to be this completely intellectual thing that is not entertaining. Like, I want to be entertained. And I do not see kind of intellectual rigor and interesting sound as exclusive from entertainment. I think you can have both, and there's no reason why you can't have both, and they can even make it better.
I'd agree with that.
So at the same time, I'm not kind of, you know, I'm doing, you know, there's not sort of lights and whistles and things like that, but you know, it's performance. You are a performer. Perform. So, and I don't necessarily feel like I've achieved that, but it is something I'm aware of. That the people are watching me. People are so there's a visual aspect as well. So I'm aware of that, and that's something I try and take care with.
think it's important. It's like what you wear on stage ultimately does actually kind of change how your performance sits.
Even just how you feel about yourself.
Yeah.
And make sure that you feel comfortable or you're not worried about how you look.
Yeah.
Even just that's important.
As it were.
It's all uncomfortable. That's right. Yeah. But there's also a performer armor, I think.
Yeah.
There's an armor. If I'm in the performance mode, then I feel a lot braver.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's just this sort of armor.
Yeah.
That I can do things or say things to people that I wouldn't do outside performance.
All right. Because it's a different.
I think there's a real power. You have a power as a performer, and you feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a different space for you in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Performance space.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, there's a certain unleashing of the beast, I think, that I always sort of try and tap into whenever playing live. It's you can do things in the sake, under the guise of music that you can't really do in society. And I think, I take a bit of solace in that fact. It's, I don't know, helps you, it's a rush. There's a rush that goes through that causes you to do very silly things sometimes.
I find it kind of like you go into a different mode, and it becomes this, especially with what we do. Like I'm trying to keep up with Brad and trying to keep up with everything I'm doing, trying to think of everything all at once. It just becomes this crazy blur, and the energy is just like pulsing, and then.
Yeah, I don't scream usually.
So just the more chaotic parts, like when you're playing really chaotically, do you have conversations about how that can go further, or where that can go?
I think the most chaotic parts are sort of like the chaotic part in general. Like if you're talking about the blasting parts and stuff, like they're almost the parts that we don't need to talk about because we know what it needs to be. That's just
it. Just needs to be 110%.
I know that he's just going to go fucking as hard as he can and flail and and I'm just but
the stops is where
it's all about knowing when to stop,
and that's definitely progressed over time. Like I guess me and Nick have just been playing together doing noise core stuff for well over 10 years now, and over that time we've sort of started to get that mind melding sort of thing where we know how each other works, and it just I don't know we pull off bullshit sort of stops that shouldn't make sense or we shouldn't be able to do. Just
somehow we just know.
Yes.
And when it's stop, like I would say, if I'm doing a long piece and I feel it's reached its peak, you know, then it's time to, you know, sort of take it somewhere else and put it to an end. Yeah, and I think once you've you know reached a peak with a piece of music, that's where I usually try to take it anyway. You know, it's time to sort of shut it down, because there are a lot of performers, I think, that just, you know, and that's fine, that they're getting into it, and you know, and when I first started doing improvised music or experimental music, you know, I was the same. So yeah, it's like just learning as you go.
Yeah,
you know?
As in they keep going. Is that
You're enjoying it, but you know, just sort of, you know, you're going over, you know, similar territory where you've already been. You know, you know, there's no need to do that. You know, well, in certain cases, but yeah.
Yeah. The more I think about what I can use, the more simpler it gets, but the more complex my actually approach to playing gets. You know, it's like, okay, well, if you've just got like a tape player to record into and you've got one oscillator, like that's what half the early like kind of experimental stuff is done with. Yeah, it's phenomenal, because there is that thinking, and there's that planning, and there's that just really pushing what you've got. Yeah, and that for me kind of produces really good results. Is where it's like, oh, I can't do this thing. It's like, oh, but I could.
Yeah,
and then all of a
it's
sudden,
interesting because like some of those guys, you know, there wasn't a great deal to draw from, you know. So that's what I always like about that. I always look at what they may have had as they may have heard or been influenced by to get to that point where they produced a great piece of music. So that's always interesting. I think.
Yeah, like because they couldn't have been listening to.
Yeah, they, you know, like, you know, what would have been there? What would they have come into? What would, you know, they've come in contact with that, you know, had influenced them to get to that point?
What was it that you first heard that started your interest in experimenting with sound?
Ooh. First thing, possibly George Adams. From the album Paradise Space Shuttle, if that's right, where he does a version of Sending the Clowns, the Sondheim thing.
Yeah.
And I would have been probably 16 or so, 16, 17, maybe only 15, and was just about to head off to the Hamilton Eisteddfod to play with a band.
Yeah.
To do with it was a small band. We were doing sort of, we were influenced by ZZ Top, so we sort of did a bossa nova thing first, and then we went into this heavy ga 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 ga. We just ripped off Lagrange in the middle of it in this, you know, nice town hall in Hamilton. But it was just prior to that, I'm pretty sure, that I listened to Sending the Clowns, and I've been listening a lot to music anyway, but I just, particularly that one, because it's sort of, it's just a show tune, it's really beautiful melody, and George Adams, who sax player, worked with Charles Mingus, does all this extended harmonic stuff, and so he's going ba 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 ba. And so I just spent the afternoon practicing that, and so yeah, that's maybe the first. It's an instant that I really know affected my playing.
Yeah.
But I, you know.
There's two major things. And one of them is sort of like an exposure to a particular historical record, and the other one was sort of like exposure to a particular sort of like performative instance. Both sort of like separated by time, but both sort of like compounded themselves to sort of like really make me critically reflect on my understanding of sound and my understanding of the possibilities of sound in relation to music, in relation to culture.
Yeah.
One of those things was sort of like, you know, having a pretty killer high school education in terms of exposure to modernist classical music and free jazz. Like, you know, when I was a kid, like, you know, from maybe year 10 to year 12 or whatever.
Yeah.
And, you know, having great music teachers who exposed me to, you know, the historical and academic appreciation of shit from Schoenberg all the way through to Xenakis, and, you know, like introduction to sort of I don't know, Ornette Coleman and, you know, John Coltrane's post-1965 free jazz kind of stuff, which opened me up to that kind of stuff because, like, I was into, you know, like rock and roll and metal and all of that kind of shit.
Yeah.
The second one was when I played at one of the What Is Music Festival gigs, maybe in about 1996 or maybe 1995.
Yeah.
And Nick Camvisis, who's an artist from Sydney, also does, you know, like a lot of voice related stuff. He was a member of Phlegm and you know, that whole Sydney crew.
Yeah.
He did this performance which was totally about forcing the audience to question what he was doing, if that was music.
Yeah.
And it was one of those moments which totally fucked my brain in terms of what constitutes music.
Yeah.
So both of those things combined, like sort of like an introduction to let's say the 20th century avant-garde in sound, and then a practical application of the most extreme version of that. They were the two things which really developed my, you know, like the last 20 years of my practice.
Yeah. I'm curious of the repercussions. Like, they sound like amazing experiences.
Yeah.
Did you kind of all of a sudden start approaching your instrument or your composition or your playing approach specifically after that, or was it just kind of like pop a different section of your cognitive function to go, oh, hang on a second?
Yeah, no, I reckon you're right. It was sort of like a revelation, you know? So, like, there was all of these sort of like bits and pieces in place, which allowed me to appreciate it, but I was limited by, you know, like some structure of, okay, sound is authorized sonic events within a duration, you know, the classic definition of what is composition, you know? Whereas, like, what witnessing sort of like, you know, Camvisis's performance was like, no, sound is a mode of perception in a situation. It's got nothing to do with authorial intent. It's got everything to do with sort of like the listener, the audience member, making those connections themselves. It's got nothing to do with sort of like form or structure or sort of like, you know, typical, you know, sonic components, which we associate with music. It was actually more about us having the capacity to think beyond that stuff.
Yeah, wow.
And it just, like, you know, fucking popped a vessel in my fucking synapses, where after the gig I walked out and I listened to all of the traffic in Elizabeth Street, I listened to all of the fucking chatter from people and all of that kind of stuff, and it was like, holy fuck, I can frame this as music, as an auditor. Like, I am finally sort of like, I won't say finally, like, it's not revelatory in that kind of sense, but it's more like, okay, music isn't an object which is imposed on someone who is the receiver of that information. Music is actually a situation where the receiver of the information can package those sensory inputs and turn them into what we call music. It was like, revelatory in that kind of sense.
With, like, sound in general, do you think you hear things differently now, like, based on X amount of years of performance? Like,
yeah, I think so. I think I can hear the gaps a bit bigger and a bit clearer.
Oh yeah.
And I think my idea of trajectories has kind of developed, or phrasing has developed as well. Whereas I remember like listening to Charlie Parker for the first time, just going, the fuck? Like, it's crazy. Oh, it's crazy. And then a few years later coming back to it and hearing it really differently and hearing this really lyrical, beautiful presentation of notes and sound and so I guess perhaps I don't know how that I guess my perspective has broadened for sure, but I don't really know how that has happened. But knowing that, and it often becomes evident when you return to a piece of music that you've played before or worked on before or listened before, or and then you can compare it. But then that's also thinking about memory and how once you've heard it, then that's a memory, and then you go back to your memory, and then you go back to the memory of the memory. And so the experience that happened in the past and that perception of it evolves as well. And so however you did hear it that day, you'll never know again anyway.
Yes. Because you're hearing the memory of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the memory of the memory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you ever get the thing where when you go past or go through a particular place and you've had a particular conversation and every time you go past that place, that conversation rings in your mind?
Yep.
You get that?
I've had it with sounds too. Like I'll pass through an area and I'll get like whatever was playing in the car radio. Like especially from places that I haven't visited in years.
Yeah.
I will get sound references to the place, and it's usually terrible pop music. Because what I'm curious about is like there's this idea then of like when you're performing, you produce a sound. For me, afterwards, like the show I played on the weekend, even just after the set's finished, you're like, I'm not entirely sure how that went. So I know that I was experiencing it when I was making it, clearly. But then when I remember the sound, it's a different sort of experience of it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have a recorder going in the room, but I don't think that works because I don't think it's the same again. So maybe a different question.
Well, I've got a response to that, but it's not particularly. I'll remember maybe bits, especially if I'm collaborating with people. Then there'll be moments in the performance that stand out as being either more successful or less successful, or more interesting or less interesting. Or sometimes, the whole thing seemed to be great, and other times the whole thing seemed to be terrible. Yeah. But that's a reflection, that's memory, that's remembering, that's not the actual experience. At the time, it's like this observation, response, listening, reacting, sometimes even, depending on the people I'm performing with, which is it my sound, is it like, it's a sort of decoding, there's some sort of decoding there.
Yeah.
So all those are differences, I guess.
Yeah. But none will actually ever give you the idea of what it sounded like.
No, not what it sounded like. They're like judgments.
Yeah.
Reflections.
my experience and my memory of, let's call it my rehearsal or my own playing, isn't being reflected in. So I know that the performance I'm doing is falling short, for example. And then the audience's, and I'm fearing that the audience's experience and then therefore memory of that is going to be a memory of not the same. But at the same time, I might be really surprised at some stage where I'm getting sounds that I don't know how that's happening and where that's coming from, and then, so there's a converse. It's a similar situation, but in a more positive light.
Yeah. How do you think stuff like that's influenced your practice, like in dealing with sound? Like that kind of reliance on or shaping of performance through?
Probably in general it's disheartening. So it would be, and it may even result in me taking a break from performance for a time before, ironically, I forget about it and go and try it again.
Do you think with that in mind that sound can be documented or performance can be documented? Like, is it possible to capture a performance?
I want to just say, well, recording devices, camera and sound recorders do a pretty good job, but
is it possible to record a performance?
Sure. Yeah.
Do you think it captures everything about a performance?
It's not the same being at a performance and watching it back on video or listening back on audio. You don't capture everything, but you get pretty close. You get a lot of, you get most of it, not all. You don't feel it, you don't get that, whatever it is about going to gigs.
Yeah. That's the bit I'm curious about, though. What do you think's missing for you?
For me, I've got no idea.
What's the impetus to go to a performance?
Well, a few obvious answers. I get to observe the reactions of everyone else in the room, which I really enjoy. I kind of find that when I first started going to see, let's say experimental music and listening to very focused kind of sonic events, I would often shut my eyes and just try to focus on the sound and have this very exclusive kind of relationship with what I was hearing, and it just kind of like cut everything else out. So it was just my perception of the sound and the sound itself kind of convening. But then at a certain point, I sort of, after a few years of going to a lot of gigs, I became so familiar with the sonic palette of experimental music that something else became really interesting to me, which is the situation of experimental music, like the whole social sort of situation of like one group of people sitting there collectively listening to a thing, and then another sort of group of people or person kind of producing a thing, and what's actually happening here? Like, what are the things structuring that situation beyond the sound itself? And I started to think of the sound not so much as the kind of text, like not so much as the only sort of subject of the experience. I started to think of the sound just as one part of this experience, and like the listening to it is another part of it, and they're listening to it together with a group of people is another part of it, and then therefore the relationship of all those people to one another sort of comes into play. Especially with something like improvisation, it's like, you know, if you gave the analogy to like stand-up, you know, like a stand-up comedian like responds to their audience constantly, you know, like silence is, you know, or laughter or heckling, or it's sort of totally contextual. And I think in a way, you know, well, certainly improvised music, I think to think of improvisation as being only concerned with this sort of manipulation of the material of the sound, as opposed to a broader concept of improvisation as being about producing unexpected situations. You know, like the sound is just a vehicle through which to produce sort of situations that, you know, in which things could happen that wouldn't normally happen or might not logically sort of happen. So the reaction of the audience is very important, as is the, you know, reaction of the performer to the audience.
And laughter, I love because laughter is sort of an eruption that is despite the mind. Laughter is something that happens sort of out of nothing. It comes out of, not out of nothing, I'm very tired. That comes out of it's spontaneous. It's a sort of eruption of joy or of engagement or something. That's not an intellectual thing. That's so I really welcome those things from the audience, but pretty much they wouldn't affect the performance. But me, the person who's sitting there in the background of the performance, absolutely engages with that stuff. And I want it. I don't have a work life of studio work. My work life is about live work.
Do you, so many things to ask, so little time. In terms of the laughter thing that you mentioned, is it because it's uncontrollable? As in, like, laughter can be a response to, like, either happiness or awkwardness or, like, intense confusion. Is that why you like the audience reaction? Because it can be, like, honest? As in, it's kind of, it's not expected?
Especially at contemporary music events. People don't attend an event planning to laugh.
That's true.
And so laughter is an unexpected activity. And it's also laughter. I shouldn't talk. This is the second time I've talked about laughter, and I really try not to be funny. Like, I don't try to be funny in my work, but I am funny. It just is funny, but it's not a goal. It's not something I try to be. But I absolutely accept that sometimes it's funny what I do. And I've been performing on stage where literally people are going,
wow,
like this, trying not to laugh because they don't know they think they're not allowed to. And then they explode, and then they kind of, the lid comes off it and they explode, and then everyone else laughs. And it's great. It's great doing that to people. for example, I can't do. I've had a cold, so I'm croaky. You know that sound.
Yeah.
I did that at the tram stop today for a while, and like I will just do that. So that's one that that's a thread where I've rarely used it in performance, but I probably practice it a lot.
Wow. Yeah. Do you just enjoy?
There's no reason to do it. I have to make a context for it, but I haven't much really.
Is there just the enjoyment?
Yeah, totally the enjoyment.
Yeah.
And the challenge of getting those clicks to just go one at a time.
Yeah.
To get them down to one at a time. The fried. And it can be a scary sound, that sound. It can be... Because
Do you find it a scary sound?
Once I did.
Yeah? Was that about the context?
I had to leave the room, but I was the only person in the room.
That's fascinating.
Scared myself. I was making this sound and it was like... There was too much of it. It was just too much. I had to leave.
How long did you wait before coming back in?
I don't know, a few hours.
Yeah? Has that happened ever again?
No.
The idea of doing something that's scary?
No.
Wow. I remember being scared by other people's sounds.
Yeah.
But I think later on they were the sounds I became really fascinated with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Due to I don't know, emotional energy about them. Or it's probably that thing of fear of public speaking. There's no harm that's going to come from it. It's just a scary sensation. So the sounds were kind of intriguing that way.
There's a feeling of it, but there is no actual danger.
Yeah, exactly.
Something about being exposed and I don't know, running out of ideas or something like that. If anything is frightening, it's probably that.
Yeah. When you say being exposed, it's I guess a curious choice of words.
Yeah.
So, can you elaborate more on that feeling? And it seems to be more based on solo performance.
Yeah, definitely solo performance. Like when you play with other people, you have this kind of security, a safety net of other ideas. When you're on your own, you're really on your own, and it can expose your compositional weaknesses. You can kind of find yourself in a dead end, and it's harder to navigate that, I think, by yourself than with other people. Yeah.
How do you navigate that? If you find yourself in a situation where you're performing, you're like, I'm feeling, exposed right now. I'm feeling this could be a dead end. How do you react to that as a performer in that situation?
Hang on a second, sorry. I think usually what I do is just either just push through and just persevere with the same idea. Or try to kind of make a game out of it in my head, just trying to think of, it's a lot of it, improvising is sort of solving problems. It's like, okay, now this is, how's this going to end? Where's this going to go? I've been doing this thing for 5 minutes. How am I going to get myself out of this? So I'll just think, okay, what's the obvious thing to do? What's the least obvious thing to do? And just kind of approach it like that. Just, just sort of make a game in my head out of it. Oh, it's the doorbell. Sorry. I'll just ignore it. It'll just be delivery man.
Yeah. In terms of, I like this idea of kind of making a game out of it, but obviously when you're performing, it's quite cognitive. Is that a fair call?
Yeah, and I think that's the fear. That's where when that happens, it becomes cognitive, and it kind of pulls you out of the moment and out of the improvisation, and that's I think when I feel exposed is when that element creeps in, when I'm starting to sort of overthink things and Yeah.
With going back a few steps, you were talking about this idea that obviously, like when you're playing and you kind of reach a dead end or something, not a dead end, but you get stuck solo.
Yeah.
There's this moment where you kind of jolted out, cognitively speaking.
Yeah.
And so you're thinking about the what next. When you're not in that mode, like when you're in the more intuitive playing mode, what's going through your mind when you're doing that?
Like when I hit a dead end and I'm playing that way?
No,
just
when you're
in
not.
general? Like
when you're
right.
doing the exact opposite, like the headspace of performing intuitively is what
right.
I'm curious about.
Hopefully there's not a lot going through my mind. And it's like you get into it's a very intense focus where you're almost experiencing the music out from an audience perspective. You're almost viewing it from outside. You're listening to yourself play, and things are just happening. Things are just happening naturally, and I mean that's the space I'm always trying to get to when I play. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the same with the solo thing with that echo mic. It's like entering into a space, and that's the whole idea about echo to begin with. Being inside a cavernous space and you hear yourself back and you have this sort of dialogue with the space. If that's the idea behind that, is sort of falling into that world.
Yeah.
And the playing is then sort of just springing out of that world rather than sometimes they're sort of structured improvisations with a series of different strange fingerings that give this particular effect that I'm trying to get, and all of that has sort of been worked on beforehand and in place. But then it's really this sense of being in something that's a lot bigger than me.
Yeah.
So something that's more just this vast space, and the listening is similar. It's like this. It's sort of listening is this kind of there's this emptiness there. You just it's a sense of presence and being tuned into over time when you're listening to someone play, you're slowly being tuned into the space and slowly noticing how the sound moves in the space and all those things. It's the same with playing, but the idea is to get to that as quickly as you can. Really. So you've practiced enough that you can drop into it immediately, and I think that's what I have with Dave, because that's his playing. He's always like that. He just closes his eyes or does his head thing, and he's there, which is it's really rare, and it's remarkable. It's an amazing way to play, and it's a privilege to play with someone like that.
Yeah, and like I said, the speed of getting into zones obviously pretty fast, depending on the people that you're playing with, but especially with Dave.
Yeah. It's just this. I mean, you can just feel it with people that it's just in their blood, and they touch their instrument and it's on. It's just like this connection that's coming out of their body and goes into their instrument. And there's no like on off. It's just that they're that whatever it is, that presence or vision or voice from something is going out of their body and into the instrument straight away. As soon as he starts playing, it's like that.
Yeah.
It's it's amazing to watch.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Again, it's really different for each different context.
Feel free to relate it to red wine and sugar specifically if you want. Like if you want to keep with that.
I don't know. It's really interesting because of the self-awareness thing with performance in general. I've always been really skeptical of people who seem to have a practice that's just
based on allowing them not to think. And I think about that a lot in terms of performance, because in some situations having a performance practice that's improvisational, there is like a lot of relief in knowing that you just have to produce any kind of sound, and that's a success. So you can sort of, but at the same time, you don't have to actively think and confront that situation in some cases. And you know, like I went to art school with people who just did the same thing over and over again because they were obsessive and probably anxiety stricken, now that I think about it. But their extreme productivity was based on the fact that they weren't thinking about anything. They were just doing this thing that they could do. And I think there's something nice about that in its form, but it can be dangerous. So basically, there are situations where I'm performing live and I'm working really hard. I feel like I'm working really hard to keep it afloat. And there's a real tension there, and that's kind of really satisfying. And then there are projects where I just feel like there's not a lot I can do to actually influence whether it's a successful performance or not. Sometimes I'll be feeling like dread right up until performing, and then I suddenly realize that through my muscle memory alone I can do it. Like just recently I had a performance with Hexam. It was an album launch, and I hadn't played with that band for quite a while, and I hadn't played guitar for quite a while, and they're actually structured guitar parts in the material, and I felt like right up until playing that I actually didn't know whether I could physically play the guitar anymore. It was just like a crisis of confidence. And as soon as we played, probably had about 4 whiskeys and a couple of Valium, and maybe everything was peaking at the right moment, but I just had to, it's like I constantly have to rediscover that I actually can do what I've been doing for the last 10 years, at least 10 years. It's like, surely by now I could have a shred of confidence in what I do, but it's not the case. And I kind of find that endlessly tiring, but kind of hilarious, and possibly a reason to keep trying to do it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what kind of makes experimental music interesting, you know. Like look, I have gripes with like kind of artists who kind of, you know, are considered experimental artists, but they've got their shit down too well, you know. I mean, it's you just become like, where's the experimentation here now, you know? One could almost argue that, like, well, when you're a kid and you pick up a guitar and you start to learn how to play songs, you are in fact experimenting because you've never known how to do that before. And then once you know how to play it and you can write a song, then you're not experimenting, and everyone would agree with that because it's a song. But if you're playing a piece that has certain kind of elements and parameters, and you like the way that sounds, and then you know how to kind of continually get that sound for the sake of a performance, which could be a recording as well, then it's not really an experiment. So we call it experimental music because it doesn't fit into the parameters of pop music or something like that, you know. I love particularly when you're engaged in a sort of group situation, that just having to really think on your feet and, you know, adapt, and also the you know, it's a lot of fun to kind of like to divert things. What happens if I do this? Like, what happens to that person?
Yeah.
Not what happens to the instrument, but what happens to that person if I play this. And that's fun.
I'll have myself inside for another hour.
I mean, well, you know, you talk about experimentation, but there's also sort of like the element of surprise, like where if I'm playing something, and I kind of feel like I know what you're expecting as an audience member, and then I deliberately choose to do something that's really out of character with that can also be really interesting, kind of. You know, get interesting results. I don't know. Yeah, I feel funny talking about like the process like that, because it's better not spoken about, I think. It's actually better to kind of like, it's kind of like magic, you know. It's like you do what you do, and the less that the audience knows about it, the more magical it is.
When working with sound, what things shouldn't be spoken about?
Oh, that's a hard one, because I don't like speaking about anything to do with sound beforehand.
Really?
I don't like expectations, so I don't on the music, like, I guess because it's improvised, but I don't like to be like, oh, let's make sure it's like this, or I don't know. I just prefer it to not have any. I prefer to not have any ideas or any expectations.
Yeah. So in terms of performance, nothing should be spoken about.
Yeah, but that's too broad for your question, I think.
No, that's a good starting point. The other thing now, like, if you didn't talk about anything though, in regards to a practice, like, if I think about seeing you playing Smash Tennis, for example, those performances are different each time. Is there any conversation about that process? Like, do you talk about certain things in terms of like collaboration?
Samantha and I generally just try and we just talk about anything else other than music. Like, we hardly talk about music, or we might talk about like someone else's music, but we don't really talk about our own music that much. There's been a few exceptions. So sometimes we might say, oh, you know how everyone always starts off quiet and then they get loud? Can we just start loud this time? Like, we might have one thing, or we'll discuss what setup we're going to have, and then we might change our minds at the last minute. But I don't know. I think that's what works about Smash Tennis. One of the things is that we both have very similar feelings about I guess we're able to function without talking about it first, which I think maybe takes certain personalities, like certain combination of personalities as well.
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily work with everybody, but I think the good thing about Smash Tennis is it does work with myself and Saman, and we're both quite comfortable with that.
Do you ever think that maybe that is the conversation?
I guess so. Or it's just a continuation. We do talk a lot. Like, we do a rehearsal is mostly talking, but it's not about, now you play this, and when I do this, you do that. Like, we only had one performance, I think, where we did that.
Yeah.
And that was a real challenge. And I liked that we did it, but it didn't feel comfortable.
Yeah. I guess I feel like, you know, even in seeing you play with people, but the sound is the conversation.
Yeah, I think so.
But
well, that's what, perhaps talking about too much in advance can maybe stop that. It kind of, maybe if you don't talk about it as much beforehand, provided you have enough trust with that person that they're not going to do something ridiculous in a bad way. Perhaps then you are forcing the communication into a different language or something.
There's also that idea of the conversation. You know, like a conversation is not talking over the top of each other all the time.
Yeah.
So if you're actually, you know, maybe the fact that you and Saman talk about so many other things and converse about so many other things, like, do you think that actually, like, the fact that you can hold a conversation might actually positively affect the playing?
Or maybe it's just another, maybe if you can talk with someone, then you can play music with them.